The freezing water hit my spine before the laughter reached my ears. It soaked instantly through the thin, frayed fabric of my grey servant's dress, turning the cold air of the great banquet hall into a field of invisible blades against my skin. I did not gasp. I did not flinch. Over the past 3 years, the Iron Peak Kingdom had taught me exactly what happened to Omegas who showed weakness in the presence of the royal court. "Look at it," a sharp, perfectly manicured voice rang out above the clatter of silver goblets. Celine, the false Luna of the Iron Peak Pack, stood over me. The toe of her velvet slipper was still resting against the overturned iron bucket she had just kicked. Registry trash. You cannot even scrub a floor without making a mess of the King's Hall. 60 noble alphas and ladies sat at the long mahogany tables. None of them moved to help. None of them looked away. They watched me kneel in a puddle of freezing, dirty water, waiting for the entertainment of my tears. I stared at the black marble beneath my bruised knees. My hands, cracked and red from hours of harsh lie and winter chill, rested flat against the stone. I breathed in slowly, trapping the tremor in my chest. I had no name, no past that I could remember, and no family to claim me. I was 404-B in the servant registry. I was nothing. But they would not have my tears. I held my chin steady and began to silently gather the spilled rags. "Did I give you permission to move, worthless?" Celine sneered, stepping closer. Her hand raised, fingers curling to strike. The blow never landed. A sound tore through the great banquet hall. It was not a shout. It was not a command. It was a low, vibrating growl that seemed to bleed directly from the stone walls, dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. At the head of the high table, King Caelan Vance was standing. He had not been standing a second ago. The massive, dark-haired sovereign of the Iron Peak Pack was staring down at the floor. Not at Celine. At me. I knew the rules of survival. Never look at the king. Never draw the attention of the apex predator. Caelan was a ruler forged in blood. A man whose slate-grey Lycan was rumored to be a nightmare of violence and absolute control. He was cold, untouchable, and wore an expression of perpetual, agonizing emptiness. But right now, his piercing, ice-blue eyes were wide. The muscles in his broad shoulders were locked so tight they trembled beneath his midnight blue royal coat. His hand was clamped over his chest, right over the spot where a tarnished silver ring hung from a heavy chain. My body did not understand what was happening, but beneath the freezing water and the biting shame, a strange phantom heat flared behind my left ear. The small, crescent-shaped scar hidden beneath my tangled ash-blonde hair burned. "Caelan?" Celine's voice faltered, her hand dropping. "My king, this servant—" "Silence." The word did not come from a man. It was laced with the absolute crushing weight of a Lycan alpha. The heavy pressure hit the room like a physical blow. Several minor nobles choked on their wine. Celine stumbled backward, her face draining of color. Caelan stepped down from the dais. His heavy boots made no sound on the marble. He moved with the terrifying, singular focus of a beast that had locked onto a target. He ignored the 60 nobles. He ignored the false Luna wearing the crown. He walked directly toward the puddle of dirty water and stopped inches from my bruised, bleeding knees. He didn't know me. I was certain of that. His eyes held no recognition of a shared past, no memory of my face. But his chest was heaving. The tarnished silver ring against his sternum was practically glowing with a strange, ambient heat. He looked at the small scrape on my knee where the skin had split against the stone, and a devastating, feral whine rumbled deep in his throat. It was the sound of a wolf that was losing its mind. Slowly, the king of the Iron Peak Kingdom lowered his massive frame. He knelt in the dirty, freezing water. The entire banquet hall stopped breathing. He reached out. His large, scarred hand hovered over my shivering shoulder before his long fingers gently tilted my chin up. The moment his skin made contact with mine, a violent shockwave of heat shattered the cold in my bones. His ice-blue eyes instantly bled into the molten, glowing gold of a fully surfaced Lycan. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a rage that belonged to an ancient, forgotten bond. The golden glow of the Lycan faded from King Kaelin's eyes as slowly as a dying star, replaced once again by piercing, turbulent ice blue. He stayed kneeling in the freezing, dirty water, his large hand still cupping my chin. The silence in the great banquet hall was absolute, thick with the unvoiced shock of 60 nobles and a paralyzed false Luna. Kings did not kneel. Alpha Lycans certainly did not kneel in spilled mop water for registry trash. "Your Majesty," Celine finally managed to stammer, her voice thin and wavering. "She is just a clumsy servant. She ruined the floor." "If you speak again," Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, quiet gravel that scraped against the stone walls, "I will have you removed from this hall." Celine's mouth snapped shut. Kaelin turned his attention back to me. His brow furrowed, a wince of genuine pain crossing his harsh features as he stared at my face. He looked like a man trying to read a book written in a language he had forgotten. He didn't know me. I saw the empty gap in his memory. Yet, the heavy silver ring resting against his chest was vibrating with a heat I could feel even in the freezing air. He stood up, towering over me once more. Guards. 2 heavily armored royal guards stepped forward immediately. "Yes, my king." "Take her to my private study. Have the hearth lit," Kaelin commanded, his eyes never leaving mine. "From this moment, she is reassigned. She serves only in my personal quarters." A collective gasp swept through the tables. I did not gasp. I only lowered my eyes, my wet hands trembling against the floor. A promotion to the king's private quarters was not a blessing for an Omega with no name. It was a target on my back. But Omegas did not argue with Alpha Kings. I stood up before the guards could touch me. My torn grey dress clung to my shivering frame, the frayed hem dripping icy water onto the marble. I kept my spine straight, refusing to limp despite the sharp sting in my bruised knees, and followed the guards out of the hall. 10 minutes later, I was standing in the center of the king's private study. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me. The room was warm, the massive stone hearth blazing with fire, but the chill in my bones ran too deep to melt quickly. I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped together, waiting. The doors opened again. Cayley walked in alone. He bypassed his massive desk and walked straight toward me, stopping only a few feet away. The sheer size of him, the oppressive weight of his alpha aura, would have driven any normal servant to their knees. But the phantom heat behind my left ear pulsed, a quiet, stubborn rhythm that whispered, "Do not bow." "Sit by the fire," he ordered. "I am a servant, Your Majesty. It is not permitted," I replied, my voice steady, stripped of any emotion. Kaylan's jaw clenched. "I gave you a direct order, and if the registry officers find me sitting in the king's presence, I will be whipped for insolence." "I will stand." A muscle feathered in his cheek. He took a step closer, invading my space. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, sudden breath. I stiffened. He was scenting me. For 3 years, the registry masters had documented my scent as ash and old dust, the smell of a broken, low-born omega. It was a scent that made people overlook me, discard me. But as Kaylan inhaled, his chest violently expanded. For a fraction of a second, the heavy, dull smell of ash cracked. I didn't know how I knew it, but I felt it in the air. A sharp, breathtaking burst of winter pine, silver mist, and blooming night jasmine. Kaylan's eyes snapped open, wild and disoriented. His hand went instantly to the silver ring on his chest, gripping it tight. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice strained, bordering on desperation. 404B, Your Majesty," I answered flatly. "Stop giving me your registry number," he snarled, though the anger was not directed at me. He stepped into my space, his sheer heat washing over my shivering body. My wolf wanted to rip the throat out of every noble in that hall for looking at you. I don't know your face. I don't know your name. But my beast recognizes you. Why? I don't know, I said honestly, holding my ground. He reached out. His fingers moved toward the side of my neck, brushing aside my tangled ash-blonde hair. He was aiming for the crescent-shaped scar hidden behind my left ear. The moment his fingertips grazed the raised skin of the scar, the silver ring on his chest flared with actual, visible light. Kaylan gasped, staggering back. He gripped his head with both hands, a harsh groan tearing from his throat. His knees buckled slightly as an invisible, agonizing force slammed into his skull. The Blood Witch's seal inside his mind was fighting back violently against the truth. Before I could reach out, the heavy oak doors of the study swung open. Queen Mother Vader stood in the doorway, surrounded by her personal guards. Her cold, calculating eyes swept over her son, grasping his head in pain, and then locked onto me. And in her gaze, I saw something that chilled me faster than the icy water. Absolute, terrified recognition. "Get her out of here!" Queen Mother Vader's voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy tension of this. He studied like a blade. But beneath the aristocratic command, I heard the undeniable tremor of panic. King Kaylan was on one knee, his broad shoulders hunched as he gripped his skull. A low, agonizing growl vibrated in his chest. his Lycan fighting a brutal, invisible war inside his own mind. He reached blindly toward me, his hand trembling. No, do not touch her. The king's affliction has returned, Vader barked at the royal guards, stepping strategically to block his view of me. The servant has triggered his stress. Remove her from his presence immediately. The guards hesitated. The sheer, suffocating pressure of the Alpha King's aura made it almost impossible to move against his will, even when he was incapacitated. But a direct order from the Queen Mother could not be ignored. 2 armored men grabbed my arms. I did not struggle. I allowed them to drag me backward toward the door, my eyes locked on Vader. She was not looking at her son in his moment of agony. She was staring at the crescent scar behind my ear. The terror in her eyes was all the confirmation I needed. She knew exactly who I was, even if I did not. They threw me back into the freezing servant quarters. The dampness of my torn grey dress clung to my skin like ice, but I sat straight-backed on my thin cot, my heart pounding a slow, calculated rhythm. The scar behind my ear continued to pulse with a phantom heat, matching the memory of the silver ring on the king's chest. An hour later, the heavy wooden door to the servants' wing B banged open.
We will discuss this later.
False Luna Celine walked in, flanked by 3 registry officers. She looked entirely too pleased with herself, her velvet cloak sweeping over the filthy floorboards. "Search the room," she commanded. The officers tore through my meager belongings. They overturned my mattress, dumped my water basin, and shattered my single wooden comb. Then, one of the officers reached beneath the loose floorboard under my cot and pulled out a thick parchment rolled and sealed with heavy red wax. "Well, well," Celine sneered, plucking the document from the officer's hand. She held it up, the red seal gleaming in the dim lantern light. A stolen royal decree, found hidden in the quarters of registry trash immediately after she was granted access to the king's private study. I stared at the parchment. It was pristine, the edges crisp and unbent. I did not take that. Theft of state secrets by an unregistered Omega, Celine continued, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction, completely ignoring my words. "The penalty is immediate execution." She stepped close, her overpowering perfume scent failing to mask the stench of her deceit. She grabbed my jaw harshly, her long nails digging into my cold skin. "You thought you could charm the Alpha King with your pathetic, helpless act. You are nothing, and tonight you will be erased." I did not flinch. I did not avert my gaze. Instead, my eyes dropped for a fraction of a second to the red wax seal on the document she was holding. It was freshly pressed. And more importantly, it bore the crest of a blooming rose, Celine's personal noble house, not the Iron Wolf of King Kalen. It was a sloppy, desperate frame job, orchestrated in a rush. As the officers grabbed my arms to bind my wrists with heavy iron cuffs, I leaned slightly into the struggle. It was a calculated movement. My numb fingers brushed against the document in Celine's hand, quietly snapping off a small edge of the brittle red wax. I palmed it, burying it deep into the fold of my cracked hand. "Take her to the correction block," Celine ordered. "Have her processed for the execution yard." They dragged me into the freezing stone corridors. The correction block was where Omegas disappeared, a place of no records and no returns. But as we reached the heavy iron doors of the deep dungeons, a massive figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking the path. It was Commander Thorn, the king's personal guard. "Halt!" Thorn's voice boomed, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his broadsword. "Step aside, Commander," Celine snapped. "This servant committed treason. She belongs in the correction cells." "The king has regained consciousness," Thorn replied flatly, his imposing frame not moving an inch. "And he claims sole jurisdiction over crimes committed in his personal study. His Majesty has ordered a change in custody." Celine paled. "He cannot. She is a thief." "The king's word is absolute law, Luna," Thorn said, though he did not bow to her. "She is not to be executed. She is to be confined to the forgotten archives beneath the castle until His Majesty personally decides her fate." Celine's jaw tightened in fury, but she had no authority to override the Alpha King's direct command. The archives were a cold, dusty tomb of ancient records, but crucially, they were completely outside the jurisdiction of Celine's registry officers. Thorn took me by the arm, leading me away from the dungeons and down a winding, dust-choked staircase. He thrust me inside the cavernous, dimly lit archive room and locked the heavy, iron-reinforced door behind me. I stood alone in the quiet darkness, surrounded by towering shelves of forgotten history. Slowly, I opened my bruised, freezing hand. The broken piece of red wax rested in my palm. They called me worthless, but they had made a mistake. They had left me with proof. The forgotten archive smelled of decaying parchment, cold iron, and decades of silence. It was a place designed to make a prisoner feel entirely alone, buried beneath the weight of the Iron Peak Palace. I did not sit in the dark and wait to be rescued. My damp dress clung to my shivering body, but I moved to the nearest wall, taking a small, sputtering candle from a rusted sconce. I walked down the massive aisles of towering bookshelves. If false Luna Celine and the Queen Mother were terrified enough to frame me for treason, it was because of the scar behind my ear. That meant my identity was a threat, and if the truth existed anywhere in this palace, it was buried down here, outside their jurisdiction. I pulled heavy, leather-bound ledgers from the lower shelves. My cracked, bleeding hands flipped through census records, old treaties, and royal lineage logs. For hours I read, until my eyes burned in the dim light. Then I found it. A heavy, silver-clasped book tucked into the corner of the Eradicated Bloodlines section. I wiped the thick layer of dust from the cover. The title read, "The Royal Line of the Silver Valley." I opened it, my breath catching in my throat. On the first page was an illustration of their royal crest. It was a white wolf howling beneath a sharp crescent moon. I reached up, my freezing fingers tracing the crescent-shaped scar hidden behind my ear. It was an exact match. I was not an orphaned Omega. I was not registry trash. I was a survivor of a slaughtered royal line. The heavy lock on the archive door suddenly clicked. I closed the book instantly, slipping it behind my back as the massive iron door groaned open. King Kalen stepped into the dim light. He came alone, without his royal guard, wearing only a simple black tunic and dark trousers. He looked exhausted. The harsh lines of his face were drawn tight, dark circles bruising the skin under his ice, blue eyes. The magical curse was physically tearing him apart. He closed the door, sealing us inside. He leaned back against the iron wood, exhaling a long, ragged breath. He did not speak immediately. He just closed his eyes and breathed in the damp, dusty air. As the distance between us closed, a profound shift occurred in the room. The oppressive, volatile alpha aura that usually suffocated anyone near him softened into a warm, protective, heavy blanket. "The pain in my skull," Kalen whispered, his voice gravelly and raw. "It stops the moment I am near you. My beast, it only sleeps when you are in the room." He opened his eyes and looked at me. "Why are you not trembling, little servant? You are facing the execution yard tomorrow at dawn." "Trembling will not change the morning," I said quietly, keeping my chin lifted. "And I will not go to the execution yard, because I did not steal your royal decree." Kalen pushed off the door, his massive frame moving silently across the stone floor until he stood inches from me. The tarnished silver ring on his chest flared with that strange ambient heat, pulling at the scar on my neck. "Celine's officers found the document under your bed. The registry demands your life for treason." "The registry demands whatever the Queen Mother tells it to demand," I replied, refusing to back down. I pulled my closed fist from behind my back and held it out between us. Slowly, I uncurled my cracked fingers. The broken piece of red W axe rested in my palm. "Look closely, Your Majesty," I said. "This fell from the decree Celine claimed I stole from your study. Your seal is the Iron Wolf, but this wax bears the crest of a blooming rose. It is Celine's personal house seal. She planted a forged document to justify killing me tonight." Kalen stared at the red wax, his jaw locked, a dangerous, terrifying stillness settling over him. He slowly reached out, taking the wax from my palm. His large fingers brushed against my cold skin. A sharp spark of energy cracked between us, illuminating the dark archive for a fraction of a second. Kalen gasped, dropping the wax. He reached up, grasping the heavy silver ring on his chest as it burned bright silver. "What did you just do?" he breathed, his eyes flashing gold. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled the heavy book from behind my back and set it on the reading table. I opened it to the first page, pointing to the crescent moon crest of the Silver Valley. "I am not 404-B, I said, my voice steady. "I am the owner of the scar that makes your ring burn, and your mother knows it." Kalen stared at the crest. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he pulled the heavy silver chain over his head. He placed his tarnished silver ring directly over the illustration of the crescent moon. It fit perfectly. The grooves of the ring locked into the design of the Lost Kingdom. Crack! The sound was sharp, like ice fracturing over a frozen lake. We both stare, and in shock. A deep fissure had suddenly split the metal of the silver ring. A blinding flash of white light erupted from the crack, hitting Kalen squarely in the chest. The Alpha King staggered backward, crashing into the bookshelves. His eyes rolled back, glowing a pure, blinding gold, as a single, forgotten memory violently tore through the Blood Witch's seal. The blinding flash of white light receded, plunging the archive back into the dim, dusty glow of a single candle. King Kaelin hit the stone floor hard, his massive frame convulsing. A guttural roar tore from his throat, not the sound of a man in physical pain, but the sound of a beast having its mind ripped open. A thin line of dark blood tracked from his nostril as the Blood Witch's seal inside his brain fought viciously to crush the returning memory. I dropped to my knees beside him. The icy dampness of my torn dress was forgotten. I reached out, pressing my cracked, freezing hands against the sides of his face. "Look at me," I commanded. I did not use a servant's tone. I spoke with the quiet, unyielding authority of the bloodline etched into the book beside us. Kaelin's glowing gold eyes locked onto mine. His chest heaved, his massive hands gripping my wrists, not to push me away, but to hold on as if I were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. "Fire," he gasped, his voice trembling, broken by a decade of stolen time. There was fire in the valley, snow stained with ash. I pulled you from the ice. I swore to the moon. He choked, his body shuddering violently. I promised. I would never let them touch you. The crescent scar behind my ear flared with a searing heat. A phantom warmth flooded my chest, an ancient, instinctual answer to his words. The mate bond. It had been buried under years of dark magic, erased from his mind and hidden from my reality. But it had never died. His wolf had always known. "You remember," I whispered. Kaelin's eyes rolled back, the gold flickering out as the curse retaliated with crushing force. His grip on my wrists went slack. The Alpha King collapsed against the cold stone floor, unconscious, the cracked silver ring resting on his unmoving chest. Before I could check his pulse, the deafening screech of grinding metal echoed through the chamber. The heavy iron door of the archive was thrown wide open. Standing in the threshold were 6 armored men wearing the blood-red cloaks of the Crimson Guard, the Queen Mother's private execution squad. They had bypassed Commander Thorn. Vader was moving to eliminate the threat before her son could recover. The captain of the guard stepped into the room, his eyes sweeping over the unconscious king and then locking onto me. He drew his blade. "The king has collapsed. The unregistered Omega has attacked the sovereign. Seize her." "He is not attacked. He is afflicted," I said, my voice eerily calm. I did not stand up. I stayed kneeling beside Kaelin, my hand resting protectively over the cracked silver ring on his chest. 2 massive guards marched forward, grabbing me by the shoulders and hauling me violently to my feet. The sudden movement sent a sharp spike of pain through my bruised knees, but I bit the inside of my cheek, refusing to let them see me flinch. "Bind her in iron," the captain ordered. "The Queen Mother has decreed an emergency tribunal. She will be executed before the sun rises." They dragged my arms behind my back, the cold, heavy iron chains locking around my wrists with a brutal snap. I did not struggle. Struggling was the weapon of the weak, and I was no longer a helpless orphan. I had seen the truth in the ledger. I had seen the memory in the Alpha King's eyes before they pulled me away from Kaelin's unconscious body. I managed to twist my bound hands just enough to drop the broken piece of red wax into his open palm, folding his heavy fingers over it. "Wake up," I prayed silently to the massive slate-grey Lycan sleeping in his chest. "Hold the proof." "Move," the captain snarled, shoving me forward. "If you kill me before the king wakes," I said quietly, looking over my shoulder at the captain, "his beast will slaughter every single one of you. You know what he is. You know what happens when he loses control." A flicker of genuine terror passed through the captain's eyes, but his loyalty to the Queen Mother's fear outweighed his logic. He shoved me again, harder this time. "Keep walking, registry trash." They dragged me out of the forgotten archives and up the winding stone stairs. The freezing winter air drafted through the high windows of the palace corridors. The horizon was barely bleeding a pale, bruised purple. Dawn was coming. I was being led to the great court. I was marching in wet, torn rags, wearing heavy iron chains, surrounded by men who intended to see me dead before breakfast. But as my bare feet hit the polished black marble of the upper halls, I did not lower my head. They thought they were bringing an omega to the slaughter. They did not realize they were dragging a queen to her throne. The great court was a cavernous, domed hall built from white marble and black iron, designed to make anyone standing in its center feel entirely insignificant. By the time the Crimson Guard dragged me through the towering double doors, the gallery was already half full. Queen Mother Vader had worked with terrifying speed. She had woken the highest-ranking nobles of the Iron Peak Pack, assembling them in the pre-dawn cold to witness a swift, legal murder. They wore heavy furs over their nightclothes, murmuring in confusion as I was hauled to the center of the judicial floor. I was shivering, my wet, torn servant's dress offering no protection against the freezing drafts. The heavy iron chains binding my wrists dug into my skin with every step. But as the guards forced me to a halt in front of the elevated judicial dais, I locked my knees. I stood perfectly straight. Queen Mother Vader sat in the High Magistrate's chair. Beside her stood false Luna Selene, wearing a crown of woven silver and an expression of absolute venomous triumph. Notably empty was the massive black iron throne at the center of the dais. The Alpha King was not here. "Nobles of the Iron Peak," Vader's voice echoed through the hall, cold and authoritative. "We have convened this emergency tribunal to address a direct threat to the crown. The servant before you, known as 404-B, has been caught in possession of a stolen royal decree bearing the king's seal. Treason against the sovereign is punishable by immediate death." A wave of shocked whispers swept through the gallery. "Make the prisoner kneel for sentencing," Selene commanded, her voice ringing out with artificial royalty. The two massive guards flanking me drove the heavy shafts of their spears into the backs of my knees. The impact sent a sharp, agonizing shock up my legs, and my knees hit the hard marble with a loud crack. But the moment I hit the floor, I forced my spine to remain rigidly straight. I kept my head high, my pale, violet eyes locked directly on Vader. "I will not bow to a false tribunal," I said. My voice was not a shout, but in the echoing acoustics of the great court, it carried the clear, cutting edge of shattered glass. The whispers in the gallery instantly died. An Omega servant speaking out of turn was grounds for a whipping. An Omega servant openly challenging the Queen Mother was unheard of. Vader's face tightened into a mask of pure fury.
Gag her. Read the sentence.
"You accuse me of stealing a royal seal," I continued, projecting my voice louder, refusing to be silenced. "But the seal found in my quarters was forged. It bore the crest of a blooming rose, not the Iron Wolf. The false Luna planted it to hide the fact that she has no right to stand where she does." Celine gasped in outrage, her face flushing crimson. "Lies! Slander! Execute her now!"
Under the ancient laws of the Iron Peak Pack, I shouted, my chest heaving against the cold metal chains. "Any wolf accused of treason facing the death penalty has the absolute right to demand the trial by Moonstone."
Total, suffocating silence fell over the great court. The Moonstone altar sat directly beneath the king's empty throne, a massive block of pure white quartz that had not been used in decades. It was an ancient truth seeker. Legend said it would burn the guilty and bless the innocent, but only if the blood offered belonged to a recognized royal bloodline. To a commoner, it did nothing. "Do not be absurd," Vader snapped, gripping the armrests of her chair, her knuckles turning white. "You are an unregistered Omega. The Moonstone trial is a sacred rite, not a toy for registry trash. Captain, execute her." The captain of the Crimson Guard drew his broadsword. The scrape of steel against the scabbard was a death knell in the quiet hall. He stepped toward me, raising the heavy blade. I did not close my eyes. I threw my weight forward, pulling hard against the iron chains held by the guards. The sudden movement threw them off balance just enough. The captain's blade swung down, missing my neck, but slicing a shallow, burning line across my upper arm. I did not scream. I lunged toward the center of the floor, collapsing heavily against the base of the white Moonstone altar. "Pull her away!" Celine shrieked, entirely abandoning her regal composure. "Get her away from the stone!" But it was too late. The warm blood from the cut on my arm ran down my shivering skin. A single dark red drop fell, landing directly onto the pristine white surface of the Moonstone. For a fraction of a second, the world held its breath. Then, a deafening, crystalline hum vibrated through the floorboards, shaking the very foundations of the great court. The white quartz absorbed my blood, and a brilliant, blinding column of silver light erupted from the altar, illuminating the entire cavernous hall with the undeniable power of a true, ancient queen. The silver light was not merely bright, it was heavy. It possessed a physical weight that pressed down on the great court, forcing the murmuring nobles in the gallery into a stunned, breathless silence. The cold that had settled deep into my bones from the freezing water and the damp dungeon vanished entirely. The brilliant glow bleeding from the white quartz of the Moonstone altar wrapped around my shivering frame like a heavy, sun-warmed cloak. It seeped into the shallow cut on my arm, sealing the skin instantly. Above the altar, the light coalesced, projecting a massive, undeniable sigil in the air for every noble to see. A white wolf howling beneath a sharp crescent moon. The lost crest of the Silver Valley. "It is a trick!" false Luna Celine shrieked, her voice cracking in raw panic. She scrambled backward, her silver crown sliding askew on her head.
She is a witch! She is using dark magic to manipulate the stone. Kill her! Queen Mother Vader screamed, abandoning all pretense of royal decorum. She stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. Kill her before the spell finishes! Strike her down! The captain of the Crimson Guard, though trembling from the sheer magical pressure of the room, raised his broadsword again. He stepped into the pillar of silver light, bringing the heavy blade down toward my unprotected neck. The heavy iron and oak double doors at the entrance of the great court exploded inward. The sound was like a thunderclap striking the center of the room. The massive doors tore free from their iron hinges, crashing onto the polished marble floor. The captain froze, his blade suspended in midair, as the absolute crushing weight of a fully unrestrained alpha Lycan slammed into the chamber. King Cailan Vance walked through the shattered entrance. He was not walking like a man struggling with an invisible affliction. The exhausting, pained tension that usually gripped his harsh features was entirely gone. In its place was a terrifying, cold certainty. His ice-blue eyes had vanished, replaced completely by the molten, predatory gold of his Lycan. The Blood Witch's seal was completely broken. He held the fractured pieces of his tarnished silver ring in his left hand. In his right, he gripped the broken piece of red wax with the blooming rose crest. "Step away from the altar." Cailan's voice rolled through the hall. It was not loud, but it carried a deep, vibrating resonance that made the glass windows high above shudder in their frames. The captain of the guard looked at the Queen Mother, then back at the king, paralyzed by conflicting orders. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Cailan crossed the vast judicial floor with impossible speed. He did not draw a weapon. He didn't need one. He reached the dais in a blur of motion, grabbing the captain by the heavy iron breastplate. With a single brutal heave, Cailan threw the fully armored man backward. The captain flew through the air, crashing into the base of the magistrate's podium and slumping to the floor, unconscious. The remaining Crimson Guards instantly dropped their weapons and fell to their knees. Cailan did not look at Vader. He did not look at Selene. He turned his massive frame and stepped directly into the pillar of silver light surrounding. Ding me. As he crossed the threshold of the Moonstone's aura, the crescent scar behind my left ear burned intensely, resonating with the altar. The heavy iron chains binding my wrists began to hum. The magical resonance of a recognized royal bloodline, combined with the proximity of my true, fated mate, overwhelmed the crude metal. With a sharp metallic crack, the iron cuffs fractured and shattered, falling into pieces at my feet. I rubbed my bruised wrists, looking up into the towering frame of the Iron Peak Sovereign. I was still wearing the soaked, torn rags of an Omega servant. My hair was tangled, my hands cracked from lie. But Cailan did not see registry trash. The golden glow in his eyes softened into something so deeply reverent, it stole the breath from my lungs. He dropped to one knee. A collective, horrified gasp echoed from the 60 nobles in the gallery. Queen Mother Vader collapsed back into her chair, her face ashen. Cailan reached out, his large, warm hands gently taking my bruised ones. He pressed his forehead against my knuckles,
closing his eyes as a long, shuddering breath escaped his lips. "I am so sorry it took me this long to find you in the dark," the Alpha King whispered, his voice thick with a decade of stolen grief and newly found truth. "My queen. My queen." The words left King Kaelin's lips as a sacred vow, echoing through the absolute stillness of the great court. The 60 nobles in the gallery, the same wolves who had laughed as I scrubbed dirty water from the banquet hall floor, were now paralyzed by a terror so profound they hardly dared to breathe. "No!" false Luna Selene shrieked, breaking the silence. She gripped the edges of the magistrate's podium, her knuckles stark white, her meticulously styled hair coming undone. "This is a manipulation, an illusion. She is registry trash. I am your Luna, Kaelin. I wear the crown." Kaelin released my hands slowly. He stood up, turning his broad back to me to face the dais. As he moved, the oppressive, suffocating weight of his alpha aura blanketed the room. The air grew so heavy that several nobles in the front row sank to their knees, unable to withstand the sheer primal pressure radiating from their king. "You wear a crown woven from lies," Kaelin said. His voice was terrifyingly calm, completely devoid of the chaotic pain that had plagued him for years. The Lycan inside him was fully awake, and it was demanding justice. He opened his right hand, holding up the broken piece of red wax for the entire court to see. "You demanded the immediate execution of an unregistered servant," Kaelin continued, his golden eyes locking onto Selene. "You claimed she stole a royal decree sealed by my hand. Yet, this wax bears the crest of the blooming rose, your noble house. You forged an execution order to murder the true heir of the Silver Valley, simply because you feared the scar behind her ear." Selene's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The proof was undeniable, held in the hand of the sovereign himself. "I did not. I was protecting the throne," she stammered, stepping backward until her back hit the heavy wooden chair. She looked wildly at the Queen Mother. "Vader, tell him. We were protecting the pack from her tainted blood." Queen Mother Vader did not speak. She sat frozen, her cold eyes fixed on the silver light still pouring from the Moonstone altar, realizing that her decade-long web of dark magic had completely unraveled. "The only taint in this court is the perjury spoken from your lips," Kaelin growled. He took a single deliberate step toward the dais. "Take off the crown." "Kaelin, please," Selene sobbed, her arrogance finally shattering under the weight of her impending ruin. "Take it off." Kaelin's voice dropped into a dual-toned Lycan command, striking the room like a physical blow. Selene violently flinched. With trembling, reluctant hands, she reached up and pulled the woven silver crown from her head. The moment the metal left her hair, her posture collapsed. She was no longer a Luna. She was an exposed criminal standing before a merciless judge. The crown slipped from her shaking fingers. It hit the polished marble floor with a sharp, hollow clatter that echoed through the vast hall, rolling to a stop near the edge of the Moonstone's silver light. "Guards," Kaelin ordered, not looking away from the dais. The remaining Crimson Guards, the same men who had dragged me here in iron chains, scrambled to their feet to obey the true Alpha. "Strip her of her noble titles. Confiscate her house's assets for the Registry Reparation Fund. Kaelin commanded with absolute, unyielding authority. Throw her into the deep dungeons to await sentencing for high treason and attempted regicide.
You cannot do this to me. I am of noble blood.
Selene screamed as two heavily armored guards seized her arms, dragging her off the dais. Her velvet slippers scraped against the marble, a pathetic mirror of how she had dragged me from the servant quarters only hours ago.
Vader, do something! Her screams faded as the heavy iron doors of the great court closed behind her.
The silence that returned to the hall was thick and suffocating. The 60 nobles kept their heads bowed, terrified that the king's wrath would turn on them next for their complacency. They had mocked the true queen. They had allowed her to be treated as trash. And now, the Alpha King's golden eyes were scanning the room, marking every single scent of fear. But Kaelin did not unleash his beast on the gallery. He turned his attention back to the High Magistrate's chair. False Luna Selene had been the face of the cruelty, but she was not the architect. The true architect was still sitting on the dais. Kaelin's golden eyes locked onto his own mother, and the temperature in the room plummeted to a bitter, freezing winter chill. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind the disgraced false Luna, leaving the great court drowning in a tense, expectant silence. King Kaelin did not return to his throne. He stood at the base of the dais, his massive frame radiating a cold, devastating authority. His golden Lycan eyes remained fixed on Queen Mother Vader. Vader stood up from the magistrate's chair. She smoothed the front of her embroidered gown, desperately trying to summon the aristocratic composure that had ruled the Iron Peak Kingdom for decades. You look at me as if I am the enemy, Kaelin. I am your mother. Everything I did to protect your reign. You employed a blood witch. Kaelin's voice was a low, vibrating rumble that shook the marble floor. You used dark magic to fracture my mind and sever a fated mate bond. You erased the survivor of the Silver Valley and forced the true queen of this territory to scrub floors on her bleeding knees. She was a liability, Vader snapped, her composure finally cracking under the weight of his alpha aura. The Silver Valley was ashes. Bringing a destitute orphan to the throne would have made you look weak to the rival packs. I gave you Selene. I gave you stability. I excised a useless memory from your mind to make you a stronger king. You made me a monster, Kaelin roared, the sound tearing through the hall like a physical force. Vader flinched, stepping back until she hit the heavy wooden chair. You did not make me strong. You made me hollow, Kaelin said, his voice dropping into a deadly, princean, precise cadence. For 3 years, my beast has been tearing at the inside of my ribs, screaming for a mate my human mind could not remember. You watched me suffer. You watched her suffer. And you called it protection. I stood within the fading silver light of the Moonstone altar, my breath catching at his words. Alpha Kings were supposed to be infallible. They never admitted weakness. They never confessed to pain in front of their subjects. But Kaelin was laying his brokenness bare before the entire court, tearing down the illusion of absolute perfection. You are guilty of high treason against the crown and heresy against the moon goddess, Kaelin declared, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "But I will not stain the judicial floor with my mother's blood." Vader let out a shaky breath, a fleeting look of relief washing over her pale face. "By the absolute authority of the Iron Peak throne," Kaelin continued, shattering that relief instantly, "I strip you of your royal titles, your lands, and your name. You are hereby banished to the silent convents at the frozen edge of the northern border. You will live the rest of your days in isolation. If you ever step foot inside the capital again, the law of exile will demand your execution." "Kaelin, you cannot," Vader gasped, reaching out a trembling hand. "Take her," Kaelin commanded. The royal guards marched onto the dais. They did not hesitate, this time. The Queen Mother was escorted away, her protests echoing pitifully off the high, vaulted ceiling before the iron doors swallowed her completely. The true architect of my misery was gone. The orchestrator of the lies had been removed. But Kaelin was not finished. He turned away from the empty dais and faced the gallery. 60 nobles sat frozen in their seats, their faces pale, waiting for the Alpha King to unleash his wrath upon them, for laughing at me, for ignoring my pain, for complicity in the Queen Mother's cruelty. Kaelin looked at them, but his voice carried a different kind of weight. "The crown failed," he said, the words echoing with solemn, heavy truth. "The registry you trusted was corrupted. The laws meant to protect the vulnerable were manipulated. And I allowed it to happen." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the gallery. The king was taking the blame. I allowed my mind to be fractured. I allowed my court to become a place where cruelty was entertained as sport, Kaelin said, his golden eyes sweeping over the terrified nobles. "Every wolf in this hall who raised a glass while my true mate was humiliated will face the justice of the registry tribunal. There will be reparations. There will be consequences. This court will be purged of its rot, starting today." The nobles lowered their heads in unison. There were no protests. There was only the profound, crushing realization that the era of their untouchable privilege had just ended. The Alpha King had held himself accountable, which meant none of them would be spared. Kaelin slowly turned away from the gallery. He walked toward the spot where false Luna Selene had dropped the woven silver crown. He bent down, his massive hand picking up the delicate metal. He walked back to the center of the judicial floor, stopping just at the edge of the Moonstone altar's light. He looked down at me. I was still wearing my damp, frayed rags. My skin was still bruised. But the crescent scar behind my ear was glowing with quiet, undeniable power. Kaelin held the silver crown in his hands. He did not raise it over my head. He did not assume he had the right to claim me just because the truth had been revealed. He held it out to me, his golden eyes filled with a raw, terrifying vulnerability, waiting for my choice. I stared at the woven silver crown resting in King Kaelin's massive hands. The silence in the great court was profound. Every noble, every guard, and every shadow in the vast, echoing hall seemed to hold its breath. They were waiting to see what the registry trash would do with the ultimate power. Kaelin's hands, scarred from countless battles and hardened by a lifetime of ruthless command, were perfectly steady. but his golden Lycan eyes were entirely unprotected. He was offering me the Iron Peak Kingdom, but more importantly, he was offering me his life, stripped of all excuses and defenses. "For 3 years," I said, my voice carrying cleanly through the hushed hall. "This court taught me that I was invisible. I was 404-B. I was the ash in the hearth and the dust on your marble floors. I was told that omegas exist only to scrub the stains left by their betters." I looked past Kaelin, my gaze sweeping over the 60 nobles who were now staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. The heavy weight of their collective shame was palpable. They were blind, Kaelin rumbled, his voice thick with raw emotion. They lived in the dark, manipulated by a false light. And I was the blindest of them all. I brought my gaze back to the Alpha King. "You did not abandon me willingly. Your mind was stolen, just as my name was. But my wolf never forgot," Kaelin whispered. "My beast knew you were mine the moment you bled." I reached out. My hands were still red, the skin cracked and rough from harsh lye and freezing water. They were not the soft, manicured hands of a noble lady. They were the hands of a survivor. When my fingers brushed against Kaelin's, a brilliant, warm shockwave rippled up my arms, settling deep into my chest. The phantom ache behind my ear vanished entirely, replaced by the steady, unbreakable thrum of a fully realized mate bond. I did not bow my head to let him crown me. I took the silver crown from his hands. The metal was cold, but it warmed instantly against my skin. I lifted it slowly, my torn gray sleeves falling back to reveal the bruised, healing skin of my wrists, and I placed the crown onto my own head. I did not need an Alpha K thing to make me worthy. I was born the Queen of the Silver Valley, and I had survived the erasure of my entire world. The crown simply confirmed what the blood in my veins already knew. The moment the silver rested against my ash-blonde hair, the Moonstone altar beneath us flared. A blinding pulse of pure silver magic rushed outward, sweeping over the entire great court. It washed away the biting winter chill, filling the hall with the scent of blooming night jasmine and ancient pine. King Kaelin Vance, the most feared Lycan sovereign in a century, closed his eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he bowed his head, exposing the vulnerable column of his throat to me in the ultimate, primal gesture of Lycan submission. Behind him, the movement rippled through the gallery like a falling wave. One by one, the 60 nobles dropped to their knees on the hard marble floor. The remaining royal guards fell to one knee, lowering their spears. The court that had laughed at my pain was now kneeling in absolute, terrified reverence at my feet. I looked down at the massive Alpha King kneeling before me. I reached out, my fingers gently brushing the dark hair at the nape of his neck. A deep, vibrating purr rumbled in his chest, the sound of a beast that had finally, after years of agonizing madness, found its way home. "Rise, my king," I whispered softly. Kaelin stood, towering over the kneeling court, but he did not step in front of me. He stepped to my side, his shoulder brushing mine, a silent promise that he would never let anything stand between us again. The era of lies and corrupted registries was over. The false Luna was in chains, the Queen Mother was exiled, and the Blood Witch's curse was broken. I had entered this hall in iron chains and freezing rags, a worthless Omega marked for death. But as the morning sun finally broke through the high glass windows, reflecting off the silver crown resting on my head, the kingdom knew the truth. The ash had settled. The true queen had risen. A true queen is not made by a crown. She is revealed by the dignity no one could take from her. Which moment proved she was the true Luna to you? If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more rejected Luna and protective Alpha King stories, and stay with us for the next one.